Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Nic and I discuss working on the dark side of environmental professions. We talk with Deborah Poppel about PAEP, that's the Pennsylvania Station, about the Pennsylvania Association of Environmental Professionals, being a certified wetland biologist, and the dark side of consulting. And finally, speaking of hashtag dad facts about mountains, which was last week, near the summit of Mauna Kea, Hawaii's tallest peak at nearly 14,000 feet, there's another surprise, 2 patches of rare tropical permafrost, which is a type of continuously frozen soil most often associated with the frosty Arctic.
That's pretty cool, right?
Yep.
Ice in Hawaii. That's what I'm saying. You can get snow in Hawaii.
Hey, after the NAEP conference, I went to Las Vegas and went hiking in the snow outside of Las Vegas. I didn't know you could do that either.
Well, yeah, that's news to me. So there you go. Ice in mysterious places.
Mount Charleston. Hit that music.
The South Carolina chapter of NAEP is excited to have Jake Duncan with D&D West lead a field day event from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. on Friday, June 9th, 2023.
Let's hope they all roll 20s.
And it's a wetland delineation training course. They'll be spending the day teaching how exactly to define a wetland and the basics of wetland delineation in the field. The day will start in a classroom, followed by fun in the field nearby as they practice the fundamentals of wetland delineation. Even better, lunch will be provided. How about that? So please register by today, Friday, June 2nd. Check it out at www.naep-sc.org.
All right, folks. It's time for Nic's funny sponsor bit.
Okay.
Ready? Are you ready?
I'm ready. All right, let's go. Let's do this.
All right, go.
Okay, so there's weddings. We all have weddings we have to go to. Super fun. We all love the fun part. But if you're in the party or you have to give a speech and you don't want to do it, here comes Web Be Gone. That's the new product we have where we just replace you with someone that looks exactly like you or as close as we can get. Maybe not perfect, but hey, it's new. It's a new service. The more we do, the better it'll get, and they'll do all of it for you. They'll have your backstory. They'll have your name. They'll even carry on conversations with the relatives you like the least. This is perfect. You don't even have to go, but we do suggest you at least, do the package where you get the video so you can see and show your friends, hey, look, no, I definitely was there. This is really me. So that's Web Be Gone. Check it out. Web Be Gone. There we go.
Ding, ding, ding. You did it. Woo.
Just for Sam.
And I forgot to mention, he has 30 seconds to do that. And he has completed the challenge for today. He wins absolutely nothing. So if you would like to keep hearing these don't sponsor, if you'd like to help us out so he doesn't have to keep making them up, please go over to www.environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out our sponsor options. We would love you for it.
Mm-hmm. Let's get to our segment. We talked about the dark side of consulting yesterday. So, or the consulting being the dark side. So, maybe I'm still in that headspace,
You're just running around picking yourself as Darth Vader now.
Yeah. I literally almost did the lightsaber sound and I'm like, no, Nic, be cool. Keep it in check. Oh, man. Yeah. But I think that's an interesting thing. I would love to talk about it. I think, there is a stigma sometimes with working with consulting because you're, like I say, you're not saving the world one thing at a time. There's a perception that you're just doing what your client wants. You're not doing what's best for the environment. Sometimes that feels true and sometimes it doesn't. But the perception is, you are, like I say, the dark side's a really good analogy for it. And I don't know. I always tell people, I'm like, well, if we're not there, if we're not involved and we're not engaged and we're not telling them what to do, they won't do it at all. And so somebody has to tell people, hey, this is not a good idea. This pristine wetland that has, the most beautiful beaver dam I've ever seen in my life can't have a road go through it. It genuinely can't. It is the nicest thing I've ever seen in my life. Now, this other one, wetland on the other side, is not nearly as valuable. So if you have to do it, you still shouldn't, by the way, because it's a bad idea to put anything on wet ground. I know that sounds very revolutionary, but yeah, no. Yeah. If you do it, the water is still going to go there. But that's kind of like the the advice. We've had projects where we tell people, hey, if like you're in the desert, right? And they're like, where's your stormwater plan? They're like, what are you talking about? It's a desert. And you're like, that's why you need it. There's only one kind of rain. It's torrential and it's, feet high and all these other things. So I don't know. I don't know what your perception of it is, Laura. I think you've done it and you're out of it now and you're doing something different. But does the stigma hold for you?
Yeah. I never worked for a consultant myself on the environmental side. So, but working on the other side, on the government permitting side, where you're coming to need to get the permits, it's kind of it's an equal problem because they're doing the same thing. The permitters are also just looking at, well, you own the property, you have rights to do stuff. Let's help you get it done, but in the least impactful way. But it's a real thing when people are considering where they want to work and what kind of job they want to have and what kind of impact they want to make, whether they're going to get into consulting. It doesn't apply to just to consulting either, because you've got mining operations, you've got transportation and infrastructure. There's a lot of industries, and it's really, humans in general. We have a system we live in that is based on progress and it's going to happen. And so it's kind of, you can either join the dark side and have the bonuses of going to conferences and getting to travel or work remotely, or you can decide that that's the dark side and you would prefer to be on maybe the government side or nonprofit side, but then you might have limited budgets and less travel. Not always. This is obviously generalizing, but at the end of the day, humans are making a huge impact on this planet. Where you make your efforts for 40 to 60 hours a week is really kind of depends on how you feel, but definitely. And I think some companies do a better job than others at mitigating their own dark effects.
Yes.
If you're a architecture company that does mostly development and you just do environmental to run your projects, that's, for me, if I'm choosing where to work, I might not feel as important to the organization. But if I work for a consulting firm that does a lot of environmental projects and does them for environmental sake, that's maybe a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Or like you work for a consulting firm that is part of a 501c3 nonprofit, for example. So all of their profits do go to the Native Hawaiian community. I don't know who I'm talking about. It's just an idea that came to my head. Yeah,
an employee-owned company, maybe? I don't know. Those are cool.
But yeah, there's having too much fun this morning. It's really an interesting thing. Because there's where do you put your time, energy, and effort? Like I say, you'll generally make more money in the consulting side of the field. And it also doesn't mean you can't, support organizations or do things like start a podcast about the environment, thing, and have guests on and talk about all these really interesting things. And there's other ways that you can do the save the world thing. This doesn't have to be your job.
That's a great point.
People like that better.
Yeah. Oftentimes when people are talking to me about wanting to change jobs and, the end goal of actually having enough experience to be able to do that seems so far away. It's like, well, you could do, or even if they love the job they have, they just don't feel like it's making a big environmental impact. You've got weekends and other time. And maybe if you're in a job like consulting where you make maybe more money than you might make somewhere else, you can donate money and time and still make impacts other ways.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like whatever you're doing, there's always an avenue for you to, find a new way to explore yourself. Really.
I think when I worked for government, I was always a little bit jealous of my consulting friends who could buy me a drink at a networking event and had a little bit more, we're going to this conference. Cool. Have fun. So the perks, does the dark side come with perks? Maybe.
Yeah. But it's funny you say that. I think there's a perception too that every consultant makes $1 billion. And I think that's also a misnomer. I remember somebody once called me you people. I got one of those from the government, a government employee who was upset about us being there and, making more money than them. I'm like, I guarantee you, you make more than I do. Let's calm down. And some of that,
even that whole mentality, that's not right in general. If you don't like that you work for government and you think you make less money, then change it. Don't start pointing fingers at other people.
I know you had that, and the government typically has better benefits. So there is a trade-off. You get some value for it, but yeah, it's much easier. I think that the perk of consulting is it's much easier to travel to conferences and do stuff like that and get training and all that other thing. So it's I can say, especially for larger companies, it's just a little bit easier or a lot easier.
Yeah, there's pros and cons to both. But as far as it being the dark side, I mean, it's a necessary evil if we're going to call it that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So that's a good stopping point, I think. That's a great topic, though.
Right. So keep doing the good dark work that you do, Nic.
I will. Yes, of course. Yeah. Man, I think Darth Vader is still cool. Is he still cool? Is that I'm looking at Sam. Okay, so he says yes. All right.
I don't know. I think Kylo Ren is cooler, but
he's just a brat. He's a brat in his 30s, That's what he is to me. And but the movies weren't for me. I get it.
Time to roll into
it. Yeah.
Welcome back to EPR. Today we have Deborah Poppel, Senior Project Scientist at RK&K and the Treasurer of the Pennsylvania Chapter of Environmental Professionals, also known as PAEP, on the show. Welcome, Deb.
Thanks so much.
All right, so we were just chatting, and you are in Pennsylvania. How are things going over there?
That's right. Things are good. Spring has finally sprung. I'm actually in the Pocono Mountains region of Northeast Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So it's still a little bit chilly in the mornings, but things are blooming. And yeah, looking forward to getting outside this weekend. We might get some rain tomorrow for the first time in about 2 weeks, I think. But
awesome. Pocono's mountains. I love that.
Yeah.
I am a little bit geographically challenged. Where is that? Because I'm in Syracuse. So is that far from me or is that close?
From Syracuse, it's probably, I'm guessing, about a 4-hour drive, but it's in northeastern Pennsylvania. I'm in Monroe County. So we're about 2 hours north of Philadelphia driving time.
Okay.
So
there we go.
Yep. Cool. Awesome. So how long have you been with the PAEP?
PAEP, I joined, I think it was in 2000. So going on close to 25 years now. And yeah, it started out as a way to get comfortable with the regulations and meet other people that are in environmental consulting. And I was introduced to it by a former president of PAEP, Bill Zamitis. And it was just a networking thing. And then there were breakfast seminars with some of the regulators. And my background, or what I started doing in my career, was focused a lot on the wetlands and water body side of things. So that's where I got introduced to PAEP. And then it sort of just has followed me throughout my career.
Nice. So there's, for those listening who may not be familiar, the NAEP is a national organization and has local and regional chapters across the country in various locations. And obviously there's the Pennsylvania chapter. Are there any special events, things that you do? Each one of these chapters has their own sort of flavor.
Sure.
California ones are very NEPA heavy, or CEQA, whatever they have over there. And they all kind of have a different sort of do you have a mix of people or?
Yeah, PAEP, as I understand it, from the history, has been around 35 years now. And it started out with a group of people who primarily worked for PennDOT and were the environmental managers. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation has different regions and districts, I guess they're called, around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And the people who work for them, who focus on the environmental regulation side of things, kind of decided to kind of get together and have conversations and talk to each other about the challenges of what they were working on. And that's sort of where it grew from. So there's still a very heavy contingent of consultants that work in the transportation industry and with NEPA. But we have, been making a concerted effort to fold in people who do different types of things in the environmental field, whether it's due diligence or whether you work for a nonprofit or work on the government side of things, and trying to diversify our membership, not just in terms of industries that people work in and careers that people have, but also in terms of age. We're really trying to bring in more young people, which has been a challenge. But as far as what we do, we've started doing a lot more webinars because, as with a lot of organizations, when the pandemic hit, we sort of had to shut down all of our in-person, networking events and, breakfast seminars. And so we we all sort of scrambled to learn how to use various video technology and doing broadcasting little webinars for people. And we've continued to do that, have offerings for our membership on a semi-monthly basis, but we also are trying to get back more into in-person things as well. And we just had our first in-person conference last October, and we're having another one coming up in September. So we do a golf outing in collaboration with the WTS, which is the Women Transportation Seminar, which raises money for our scholarship fund. And we have 3 scholarships that are given to undergraduates in the environmental field. And this year, we have a new scholarship, which is focused on bringing in students who are in underrepresented groups, like students of color or that sort of thing. So we're excited about that.
Oh, that's great. Love to hear that.
Cool. Yeah.
So students and young persons in the area, be sure to check out PAEP. And lastly, on this topic, you're the treasurer, right? How long have you been doing that?
Only so for 2023, I took over as treasurer, and which is interesting because I'm terrible at math, which is one reason I'm not an engineer or anything that would require math as a subject.
I like it. You're challenging yourself.
It's helpful that there's spreadsheets and calculators that can do most of those things for me.
Well, Nic just got appointed a treasurer for NAEP, so perhaps the two of you can share notes or
just commiserate, whatever it is.
Exactly.
Well, now as treasurer, I feel that it's like incumbent upon me to do fundraising too, which is so the first thing we did is we did a March Madness bracket pool. But cool. I did it for the women's NCAA tournament as opposed to men's. So that was fun. And there was I forget if it was ESPN, one of the big groups has a website where you can just make a little team and it'll track everyone's results for you. So
that's pretty cool. Yeah. Fun.
But it's always a challenge for any nonprofit to raise money in today's world with so many competing interests and valuable ways for people to spend their money.
Yeah. And it is a challenge, but it's also, it's kind of it's great to be engaged and involved. And I think that's, something we talk about, how to be involved and engaged in an organization. Being part of an organization isn't just about being, a member. You're doing a whole lot more. So what made you want to be the treasurer? What were you I'm already on the board, but I can do more.
Yeah, I was the president for 2 years running, and then I was a board member at large, and I was the conference chair, and it was just a role that needed to be filled, and also just a different way for me to contribute. I wanted to take a step back from a lot of the heavy lift that is involved with being the president, but still provide value to the organization. So that's why I took over as treasurer. And, just getting back to, younger people and emerging professionals, it's so valuable, I think, to be involved in a professional organization for people to network and to really learn, what other people are doing. And I think with social media and the prevalence of information being available at your fingertips on the internet, that really makes it hard for people necessarily to want to join something, an organization. So, there's definitely challenges there that we need to face.
Right. Yeah. And it's all very fair and reasonable. And, I could say there's a long-term value to being in an organization too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because you building relationships, and sometimes those become partnerships, and,
so many of the people that I've met that I know in this industry are people that I've met through PAEP. I didn't necessarily work with them at a company or, team with them on a project, but I know them through PAEP. And, I can bounce ideas off them, and I've formed friendships that way. So it's been great.
Yeah, 100%. I really love that. And so, and I think it's really neat because you can look back over your career, right? And see how things changed, as you went along. But first you were interested in biology. So what drew you to the science?
Yeah, I guess, some of it is just innate, and ever since I was little, I can remember being interested in the outdoors and wild creatures and bugs and critters. And just, I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, so it's not something you would normally necessarily expect, but my parents would always take us out on walks in the woods. And even if it was just on our neighborhood park, and, I got really interested, that's one way. And that's another reason it's so important for kids to get outside, because it can foster a love of nature. But also, I can remember going to the library, and I just took out, I don't know, I probably was not more than 5 years old, and I took out a book on sea turtles, and I was like, oh, these are so cool. Look at the little sea turtles. And I just fell in love with them. And ever since then, it's always just, and I even said to my dad, I was like 6 or 7, and I'm like, what do you call a person who studies turtles for a living? And he's like, it's a herpetologist. And I was like, that's what I want to be. I'm going to be a herpetologist when I grow up. So, and I still have this little piece of paper that I wrote in like elementary school. It was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, I want to be a herpetologist because they study turtles. Awesome. So it's a combination of, a love of reading and just a love of being outside. And so like a lot of people, I'm like, I love animals. So for a long time, I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. So I was going to, like, when I was applying to colleges, I'm like, I'm going to study biology and I'm going to become a veterinarian, and because I love animals. And then like one summer I worked at a vet's office, and I was like, I don't really think I like this. So then I was like, I really want to be outside. So I switched my major and I transferred to University of Delaware, and I got enrolled in the entomology and applied ecology program there. And the rest is history. Yeah,
which is really cool. I mean, like, I love that. And it's kind of, it kind of leads me right into the next thing I want to talk to you about. So like, you have what you studied, what you talked about. You talked about being a herpetologist. So you worked in Frostburg, and in my graduate research, I worked with box turtles, right? That was my big thing. So there was a lot of data coming from Maryland, from these programs about the habitat and how the species are moving over time. So what did you do, and how? I'm afraid to look because I may have cited you before, which is super cool.
Well, as you mentioned, after my bachelor's degree, which I got at University of Delaware, I spent a few years kind of bouncing around the country, working seasonal field biology jobs. I was out in California, then I was down in Florida, and then I finally, went back to grad school at Frostburg State, where I got my master's degree. And again, I was like, I want to study something related to reptiles and amphibians. And my major professor, Dr. James Howard, had a connection with the guy who was the head of the Maryland DNR. I don't know if he was the head at the time, but he was one of the senior biologists, Scott Smith, who was doing a lot of the research and conservation in bog turtles and other protected species and he was trying to get some funding through Maryland DNR to do research with bog turtles. And at the time when I was first starting, that wasn't successful. So we wound up finding funding through another source, and I wound up doing some research on the eastern shore of Maryland near Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, focusing on habitat assemblages, different forest types, and what the connections are with what sorts of herped fauna live there, and whether there are any correlations you could make between the different forest types. So, I got to kind of get my feet with different sampling techniques, using funnel traps, using pitfall traps, collecting assemblages of snakes, turtles, frogs, salamanders, you name it, and then doing the statistical analysis needed. So all the things that go into putting together a master's thesis. And then subsequently, as I was finishing up my thesis, that funding did come through to help out Maryland DNR with the bog turtle research, which was a radio telemetry project, and another grad student at Frostburg was involved. And we all kind of worked together to do some of the first home range studies for the bog turtle in Maryland. And that got published in 2 papers in Journal of Herpetology. So that was very cool stuff to do.
It's really, really cool stuff. I'm certain at this point then that I definitely did cite it. So that's really neat. That's really, really neat. And I love, we haven't really talked a whole lot about sampling techniques on the show, but it's one of those things like, you have to choose the right sampling for what you're looking for, right? If you're trying to catch a box turtle, like they'll just look at a drop trap. They'll literally do that little turtle thing. They're like, you know what I mean? So it won't work for them. But, I think that's really neat. I don't know if you've you're talking about different types of techniques. Maybe dive in a little bit more on that. Like what were you actually doing? Like what were you looking for? Are you looking for every kind of species?
Yeah, I mean, because I guess, when you have to come up with the research topic, you're like, I don't know. It's like, what does someone not know yet? Right. And it's like, you don't know anything and you're a 20-something grad student. You're like, I don't know. So, I was really kind of just looking at collecting as many different types of herpetofauna as I could, looking at the diversity. I was comparing diversity indices, and you're really making me dig deep into the recesses of my brain and what these were, Shannon Wiener index and all that stuff. But,
right.
Oh, I know that one. Yeah.
But when you get down to the nitty gritty, we had to basically dig ditches and put out these rolls of aluminum flashing that's used for roofing material to set up as drift fences because, my professor was like, didn't want to use silt fence because the stakes would get in the way and he thought it would divert the snakes or the salamanders. So we had to use one smooth sheet. And he's like, you got to use aluminum flashing. So in order for it to go into the ground, he had to dig these ditches and there were roots everywhere. And it was really difficult to install. And then you cut your hands. And you use hardware cloth to make the box funnel traps. And I can just I put hardware cloth up now in my garden as fencing, and I'm having these flashbacks to building the building traps. And I'm like, oh my God, the type of manual labor you had to do as a grad student is just unreal.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. That's exactly what I wanted you to say, because it's so much goes into it. It's such a fun thing. No matter what you're doing, it's very intense work.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, you do the grad school work, you get your job, and then we've talked a little bit about certifications as well. So you're a certified wildlife biologist.
That's right.
So what made you want to go after that certification? And did you have any challenges along the way?
So I think it was partly validation in that when you first, like you mentioned, when you first get out of grad school and you're trying to find a job in the field, and, I applied all over all sorts of things. And, I applied many different times to Fish and Wildlife Service or to different state programs, Fish and Game Commission down in Florida, and applied to nonprofits. I interviewed with the Nature Conservancy and, finally found work in private consulting world, which at the time I was like, I don't even know what this means. But, so when you think wildlife biologist, a lot of people, the first thing that comes to mind is somebody who works for a government agency, works for a state game agency or works for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so you sort of, and they used to joke, there used to be a joke, maybe not so much anymore, because I think there's a greater understanding of what consultants do and the value of what we do, but that you had gone over to the dark side if you were working in the private industry, because you weren't really saving the planet. You were working for the evil developers, and shame on you. But so there is that sense of validation. It's like, if I have this credential, this certified wildlife biologist, it means that I'm really a wildlife biologist. It doesn't matter that I worked with salamanders or that, now I'm a consultant and a lot of what I do involves, habitats as opposed to hands-on work with animals. You're doing a lot of dealing with wetlands and regulatory aspects of things and not as much, the fun stuff that you got into it in the first place. So it's sort of like that was it was like validation that I wanted for myself, but also it meant something to me and it was important to me. So it took from the time I started, I got my first job in consulting in the late 90s. And then probably 5-6 years later is when I applied to be CWB with the Wildlife Society. And I had to document everything. You have to submit all your academic records, prove that you took all the courses you needed, and then show that what you were doing in your career was relevant and it was approved. And you do need to every 5 years re-up. So I have to keep track of different continuing education and things that I do so they ensure that you are still, maintaining the level of knowledge and skills that you need to still be a certified wildlife biologist. So, yeah,
which is really, really cool. And I love that. Yeah, I say you're setting me up here. It's almost like we're planning this. It's funny because we talk about legislation, right? Like a lot of what we do right now is regulations and policy. And let's see, you're talking about wetlands and waters of the United States. And, we've talked on the show plenty of times, it's one of the most, if you tried to explain to somebody what we've been doing with waters of the United States for the last 5 years, right? Everyone's head explodes, even the people who know what's going on. Like I say, it's been a really bumpy few years. Do you have advice for, because like I said, we had the SACA decisions forthcoming, which is going to change, a lot of what we're doing already. But, we've had lots of different changes over time. What's the advice you have for people working in that industry? Like,
I mean, I don't know that I can speak to advice for agencies, but it boggles my mind that now politics is just like so, it's in everything and it's so divisive, and it's almost getting to a point where it's nothing about it seems helpful. But I was like, how can the definition, something so basic as, where water flows and what it creates is like changes every 4 years. And it's just crazy. But the important thing, I think, and I'm sure that the people at the Army Corps who are tasked with not enforcing, what's the word I'm looking for, who have the jurisdiction over, making sure that in the field, the definition is applied. Make sure that the people who work in the field and the people who deal with this day to day have good metrics to go by. What do we need to know when we are out there and I'm delineating a stream for a bridge replacement project? What do I need to be looking at? And how can you make it as simple as possible? And if you have a wetland, how are you defining, what's isolated, what's not isolated? If the connections are important or not, what's going to be regulated? So it's really, as opposed to all the legal aspects, coming up with the best field indicators and tools possible especially for not just people who've been doing this for 20 years like myself, but the folks that are just starting out, So I don't have a great answer to that, but it's just,
it's impossible. Yeah. Yeah, it's just going to change in a few years. But, we're talking about consulting and like your career and everything like that and how different it is than, maybe what you thought it would be when you started. But like, what do you love about it? What's the stuff about your career, like over your career, that you've really enjoyed?
Yeah. I mean, being outside is still one of the great things that I enjoy doing. Anytime that I can educate other people, whether it's stakeholders or folks, engineers that I'm working with, on why it's important to protect the natural world and different aspects of the light. I enjoy going out, and sometimes I do say pre-construction monitoring. Let's use a bridge replacement as an example. One of the things that I do is I'm on the list of qualified red-bellied turtle surveyors in Pennsylvania, which is a threatened species in Pennsylvania. And they are more of an aquatic turtle species than, say, the bog turtle, which likes wetlands. Red-bellied cooters is another common name for them. They live in larger bodies of water and larger streams. And so it comes up a lot of times on projects that involve bridge replacements. And so that I will get called out frequently to do, before they're about to either take down the bridge or install their silt fence or put in their cofferdams, to go and make sure that everything, there's no turtles there, there's no nests. And, the contractors are always really interested in what I'm doing, because it's not often that, they'll have environmental inspectors, but it's not often someone has to come out looking specifically for turtles. And they're always really curious about, why are you doing this? And what does the turtle look like? And so, being able to share my knowledge with them, and then also with engineers, is just really, it's really fun. And it makes me feel like I'm kind of making a difference in that regard. And also writing too. I've always liked writing and been told that I'm good at it. And so it's important. Part of what we do is writing things. So I like being able to, convey the messages we're getting across in the written word as well. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Laura. Yeah. I'll shut up.
No, you're good. Nic's always looking for good writers, encouraging people to pick up that skill and keep working on it.
Yeah, it's a really important one, for sure.
Yeah. Do you have any specific projects you're working on right now that you want to talk about a little bit?
There are a couple of, there's a historic bridge in South Central Pennsylvania that has a lot of really interesting aspects to it. It's a 3-mile, I think it's about 3-mile long bridge, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. And it's a concrete arch bridge with multiple spans and more things that a bridge engineer could describe than I can. But there's peregrine falcons that nest on it. There are mayflies, which is a type of insect that swarms certain times a year that creates these great clouds that are actually a safety hazard to people when they're driving over the bridge. So, part of the rehab of this project entailed many different NEPA aspects for the historic side of things. And then it also included biological aspects of, we had to design or help design these devices to keep peregrine falcons from nesting on the bridge because it's too big and long to shroud or put netting up, which is a typical mitigation measure. And then the engineers are coming up with these different lighting schemes for how to keep the mayflies from swarming on the bridge. So it's one of these projects, and it has gotten NEPA approval, and it's now in the kind of tail end of final design and moving into,
cool.
So that one is one of those projects that has a lot of different cool aspects of environmental studies that all fell together in one project. So that was really neat. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, now it's time for field notes, and I'm excited about this because always talking to biologists, we have great field stories. This is a part of the show where we talk to our guests about memorable moments doing the work that we do, and we encourage our listeners to share their stories using the hashtag field notes so we can read them on a future episode. And you've spent so much time in the field and with your herpafauna and all of these things. And I want to know, have you gotten, you want sea turtles. Have you gotten to work with sea turtles? Do you have any stories?
Yes, I do. I know I have an amusing story to tell, but I did achieve my dream of, I worked for one summer, or I guess it was from a spring through fall season in the early 90s with an organization in Southwest Florida called the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. And they're based out of Naples, and they have a nature center, and they have a wildlife rehab center. And they also have been involved with a sea turtle research project on Marco Island, which is a barrier island on the Gulf Coast, for quite some time. I assume they still are doing it, but they had interns come out every summer, and basically we would ride up and down the beach on ATVs looking for the turtles when they would nest at night. And our job was to put these cages basically over the nests to protect them from raccoon predation, because raccoons were very prevalent on the island. And as soon as the turtles would leave the nests, if they weren't protected, the raccoons would come out and dig up the eggs. And so our job was to do that, and then also to monitor the nests and, keep track of when they hatched and dig them up and count the eggs. So that it was a very, very cool job. But one time we would normally take a boat out to the island to do our research, but once a week we were tasked with being in town meaning being in Naples. And so you would get these phone calls from people who would report strandings or that report nests that they found and things like that. And when you were in town, you would have to take a ferry over to the island. And one day I was on the island and I missed the return ferry. It was only once every several hours. I don't remember. But for whatever reason, I decided I was going to swim back across the Intracoastal Waterway.
Oh my God.
Because I missed the ferry. And it looks like it's narrow, but it's really not that narrow. And I'm swimming across, holding my clipboard with my data forms over my head.
Oh my God.
And the lady who drove the ferry, she's like, "Why didn't you just tell me? I would have come back and got you."
Oh my God.
Meanwhile, there's boats and alligators and all sorts of things. And so that was one of those silly things you do when you're in your 20s and don't know any better.
Right.
100%. How long did that take you? What?
Right.
I don't remember. It must have been a half an hour. I think it was about a half an hour. And I was fully clothed. So,
that is really impulsive.
That's one of those things that health and safety is not at the forefront of your mind in those days. And now it's like so pounded into you. It's like you would never think to do that. But
right. Do you have another story like that? How impulsive were you?
Yeah.
I'm not usually an impulsive person, no, but I guess I was just like, I didn't think through all the steps. Like I could just ask her to flag her down and come back and get me. But I was like, oh, she's not going to be back for 4 hours. I guess I have to swim,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I have another, when I was trying to think, right. I was doing some bog turtle surveys and I was pregnant at the time. I was only I think I was in my first trimester, and I was in one of these fields, agricultural fields that had an electric fence running through it. And I had to get from one side of the fence to the other because the wetland was on both sides. And I wound up crawling under the fence. And I guess because my stomach was big, I wound up hitting the fence as I was going under and getting zapped. Like I got just like shocked, and then I was like, oh my God. And then I was like, oh, my baby. And I I had to run or ran to the OBGYN and I'm like, please make sure I didn't kill my baby. And she's fine now. She's 19 years old. So
she has lots of energy.
Yes. But that was a little scary.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, it's kind of like you say the perils of youth, right?
Yes.
It's funny to think about, like all the stuff you would do when you're younger that you almost feel invincible in a way.
Right.
That you don't when you're older.
It's invincible, but it's like we're pounded in our brains. We got to get that data at all costs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. And I love that you're swimming, holding up your data, making sure.
Yes.
Save the data.
Who cares if I drown out here or get eaten by an alligator,
I've got my data sheets.
We got the data sheets right here.
That's too funny.
Let's change gears to your hobbies real quick because we're getting close to the end here. Particularly interested in your bushcrafting. Is that like survival training?
Yeah.
Not exactly. And I don't purport to be an expert by any means, but a lot of people, when you think like, oh, I'm into survivalism, and it's like I'm preparing for the apocalypse, or I'm stockpiling stuff and in my house and weapons. This is not that. This is more like, two of my favorite books when I was a kid growing up were Island of the Blue Dolphins and My Side of the Mountain, which are about people who kind of live in the outdoors on their own. So, I love the idea of being able to kind of just be out in the woods and be able to take care of yourself. So it's, order to survive, but knowing how to build a fire, knowing how to make a shelter, knowing how to forage for plant and to fish and to provide for yourself. And so I'm kind of I'm starting small by getting back into just camping, but like developing my skills and learning things as much as I can for like, if you ever did have to find yourself in a situation where you're out in the wilderness and you needed to be able to build a fire or find shelter or, filter your water, how to do that. So I met a woman on a trip I was on who said that she described it as, she's like, I grew up feral. And I'm like, what does that mean? She's like, well, my parents were sort of neglectful. So she's I had to like fend for myself, and I know how to like hunt squirrels and I'm like, that is so cool. I'm like, that's so cool. I'm like, I want to learn from you. So.
Right. Yeah. That's wonderful.
That's great stuff. All right. Well, we are running out of time. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about before we let you go?
Yes, I have one thing. One of my professors at University of Delaware, Dr. Talamy, has written a number of books. He's a New York Times bestselling author on the importance of native plants and promoting biodiversity. So I encourage, I'm going to give him a plug to read anything by Dr. Douglas Talamy and to check out Homegrown National Park, which is a grassroots movement to get people involved in converting their lawns to meadows and planting native. And that's another thing that I am doing in my spare time. So check it out.
That's awesome. I love it.
Cool.
Okay. Last question. Where can people get in touch with you?
I am on LinkedIn as Deborah Poppel, and you can also send me an email to dpoppel@rkk.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. And if you are in the Pennsylvania area, look up PAEP.
Thank you so much. It was a blast.
That's our show. Thank you, Deborah, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Bye.
See you, everybody.